This is VikesNow, and I am Dustin Baker. We are winding down the season that we think will probably be over on Sunday, whether the Vikings win or lose. It's still a long shot to reach the postseason. But I'm here with Dakota Koep and Tyler Ireland, our Friday guests. Tyler went to the Vikings game, so did I. We left disappointed wholeheartedly. Dakota, thankfully for her sake, did not go. She's still intact. She's got a little bit of hope, I'm guessing, about these postseason. But I'm going to jump right into the questions. And Tyler, I'm starting with you. I've contemplated this all week, from a writing perspective, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario from the Vikings? So I'm going to ask both of you a hypothetical. It starts with you, sir. If you had a magic wand, you own that magic wand, and you could wave it Sunday, would you rather have the Vikings slip into the postseason with the 4-team parlay that is necessary to get them in the 7th seed, or everything happened for the draft pick where they end up picking 9th? What would you, if you had that wand, what would you allow?
If I were Quasey and I was the one sitting in that booth, I'd be smiling too, because give me that 9th overall pick. Look, this is one of the best quarterback drafts in a while. There's a lot of good quarterbacks, but also near the top 10, there's a lot of quarterback needy teams. So you're not going to have like the third best quarterback fall to you at 14.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how it's going to go. There's just going to be a massive run on quarterbacks early. I mean, you have Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. I mean, Michael Penix, even with the injury history, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix. Now, some of those guys are more closer to top 5, top 7. Others might fall a little bit, but I just think there's way too much demand for quarterbacks in this year's draft. You look at the Patriots, you look at the Broncos, you look at the Giants, Steelers, Falcons. I mean, that's 5 right there. There's probably more teams I could name. So the Vikings are going to have a lot of competition to try and get a blue chip quarterback prospect in this year's draft. And the difference between the 9th overall pick versus like the 13th, the 14th overall pick is how easy will it be for Quasey to trade up? That's the difference. Because look, as much as a trader as Quasey is, if he has like the 20-something pick, like you can't trade up for CJ Stroud. Like you wanted to do that last year. You wanted to trade up for CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson. And, he just didn't have the draft capital to do it. But if you're in the top 10, you can trade up for pretty much anyone. So it just opens up everything. And plus, I don't want to play Dallas in the playoffs. Are you kidding me? I don't want to play Philly. Like with a backup quarterback. I mean, I was so excited for Jaren Hall, but like he's not ready.
Mm-hmm.
He's not ready. I don't have faith in Nick Mullins to win me a playoff game. And I don't have faith in Josh Dobbs to win me a playoff game. So that right there tells me all I need to know about this team. And, I don't like rooting against the Vikings, but it's probably in their best interest if they did not win this week's game.
I wrote an article about this on VikingsTerritory.com. By my count, if you include teams like the Rams, who could peek ahead at a quarterback for life after Stafford, they wanted to start the clock now and draft the guy. There are 14 teams that could realistically draft a quarterback in this draft, including the Vikings. And to Tyler's point, owning the 9th pick, which they probably won't get, would help a lot more to trade up, because especially if the Washington wins the national championship, Penix is going to be talked into the top 10 or top 8. And yeah, Quasey will have to use that 9th pick, 10th pick, 11th pick, and it would just be easier if it's that high rather than the 15th, which is the doomsday scenario. On the other hand, there's no direct correlation in NFL history of having a top 10 pick and getting an eventual Pro Bowl or Hall of Famer. They come from all over the damn place, whether it's the pick 28th or if it's the, Russell Wilson. You would think right now all of these quarterbacks are infallible, but there's going to be about half of them are going to be shitty. One's going to be really good. Second one's going to be decent. And it's inexact science. So that's what leads me to believe that no matter what happens, the quarterbacks peppered all over the draft. You just got to get the right one. Dakota, same question to you. Magic wand, the Vikings go to the postseason, probably play the Cowboys, or Magic wand says, hey, take it. You get the 9th overall pick.
Part of me is kind of selfish and really just wants us to keep going, especially if we end up playing like the Eagles over the Cowboys, because honest to God, and like shout out to all my friends who are Eagles fans. Yes, nice Eagles fans exist. I don't think this Eagles team is exactly thing of nightmare stuff. I think that they are pretty beatable even with Nick Mullins. I know that some people are going to be like, Dakota, what are you talking about? It's not going to happen. I think it might. I maybe that's me and my like positivity brain. Also to your point, Dustin, I mean, look at the Brock Purdy's of the world, look at the Ivan Paces. I think that talent can be found wherever. And if you take into consideration the fact that Chicago also kind of needs some more veteran help on their end, and they've got 2 first-round picks. And let's be honest, the Bears and the draft don't exactly mix. I don't know what their GM is on, but sometimes they do things during the draft, and I'm like, what are you doing? I feel like we have a chance to maybe even trade with some of the Chicago Bears first-round picks. I don't think we would get the first overall pick, but they definitely are also a top 10 draft pick team, so we could probably get their second pick there. But to me, I'm a Vikings fan through and through, obviously, and for me, there is nothing more better on a Sunday than the Vikings, even if I'm super disappointed and end up getting really drunk. So,
which sounds like happened against the Packers for you, and kudos to you for that. I want to clarify that I do want the Vikings to draft a quarterback in the top 10, but I just know through like hours of research that when it's all said and done after the fact, in retrospect, the good quarterbacks like, Roethlisberger, I mean, they come from all over the draft, whether it's in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and you just have to hope your general manager knows what he's doing. All right, so we've kind of established, kind of split on this. We'd like to see the team in the postseason at 8-9 and pull off the most improbable run ever. But realistically, nobody will complain about the draft pick. You want to avoid the doomsday scenario, which is the Vikings win, but then like the Eagles beat the Cardinals, the last second field goal, and boom, you're at 14th or 15th. That would be the worst case scenario. On another note, Tyler, we're going to put a bow on this season probably next week when we chat, but let's get started now. What was your favorite Vikings moment of 2023?
My favorite Vikings moment of this season was Jordan Addison ripping the ball from Javarius Ward for that touchdown to close out the half against San Francisco. I mean, I just really like Addison's rookie year, but what really struck me about this moment was earlier in the game, there was an interception where Addison was targeted and he got the ball like ripped out of his hands, ripped out of his grasp. And, instead of getting down on himself or letting that affect him throughout the rest of the game, he went tit for tat and got one right back. So, that's probably my favorite moment. Also, I know it's just the Raiders and they weren't that good, but 3-0, like shutting them out completely. No points until the fourth quarter. That was like a fun game. It is really funny too. I was hoping for the 0-0 tie, but a shutout I will always welcome as well.
Coda, he has an Addison moment. I will have an Addison moment here in about 3 minutes. What was your favorite moment before we get into some disappointments? What do you got?
I was also going to mention the Raiders game. I went to a sports bar here in California, and I actually had a Raiders fan buy me a shot of tequila because he like admired the fact that I knew my team so well, which pretty cool, especially from a Raiders fan. For me, I would have to say that Atlanta game and Josh Dobbs start. I went with a friend of mine who's a Niners fan who lost a bet. I bet with all my friends once a year. If the Vikings win a game that they shouldn't, I have to buy. Or if the Vikings win a game they shouldn't, the fan of that team has to buy a Vikings jersey, and if they lose, I have to buy that team's jersey. So he's a Niners fan, bought a JJ jersey, and we went to a sports bar to watch the Atlanta game, and watching that together with a bunch of surprisingly Vikings fans in Southern California, at a non-Viking sports bar, watching that entire game it was insane. I was stressed. I was excited. I just so nuts, and I wish that magic had continued. Unfortunately it didn't, but I think for me that will always be like the highlight and the most memorable part of this season for sure.
That would be, I think that's probably my most memorable. And it would probably be my favorite if the Vikings were about 10-6 right now, or 10-7 and going to the postseason, and Dobbs was still pretty good. I would look back and be like, yeah, that has to be my favorite moment. But because I have a little bit of hindsight and I'm like, oh, well, that was only a 2-game stretch where he was any good. My favorite moment was against the Packers. They had just turned the ball over, the Vikings did, and instantly Kirk Cousins threw a touchdown to Addison. They went up 24-3. And it felt like that was the first time in 4 or 5 years where the Vikings had just seized a team by the throat and said, "Nah, like we are here." And they were 4-4 at the time, and were they about to be 4-4? Yeah. And it felt like, all right, we've turned the corner. Kirk is like just coming off the San Francisco game. And so, yeah, I would say for that brief moment when I was like, this is the type of ass kicking you want to deliver anywhere, especially at Lambeau Field. Of course, what do I get for all of the goodwill? Kirk Cousins was hurt about an hour later for the rest of the season. But that would be, I can remember thinking, holy shit, 24-3 at Lambeau. The team has turned the corner. And, so much for hindsight now. They're about to finish 7-10 and blah, blah, blah. All right, those are the positive moments. Let's get into a couple disappointments, Tyler. Who were you most disappointed with, whether it was an aspect of the Vikings or a player in 2023?
Yeah, for me, it's got to be Marcus Davenport. Like, you could make a good argument for like Alexander Madison or Dean Lowry or some other player. But the thing that really sticks out to me with Davenport is the other players tried. They may have failed in playing good football, but they tried. I never questioned Madison's effort or Dean Lowry's effort, but I certainly questioned Marcus Davenport's effort. If you go back to before the week 3 game against the Chargers, Marcus Davenport had missed like the first 2 games. And I mean, he might have played a little bit week 1, but he missed most of those first 2. And he had a locker room press conference with Darren Wolfson, and just his demeanor and how little it seemed like he was taking that moment seriously when the team had started 0-2 was really eye-opening. And I even wrote an article back then saying that his lackadaisical demeanor, was just kind of disappointing. It just showed like he wasn't putting the same level of effort as everyone else. And it's not because he was hurt. It was because he didn't care to take part of his job seriously for 1 minute, just talking with a member of the media. He was sticking his tongue out. He was just being immature. And if you can't conduct yourself in a professional manner for a single minute in the locker room when you're being interviewed and that, hey, I'm the second edge rusher on my team, I should try and be a leader, or just say anything boring, just do the generic 1 to 2 minute, I want to be here for my team, da 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 da. But he just showed this certain level of immaturity that was very off-putting even back then. And fast forward to now, there was a report from Darren Wolfson in December that basically said the Vikings were expecting Davenport to be healthy now to activate his 21-day practice window. They haven't. They're surprised that he hasn't even played and that they're questioning his effort now. Well, I saw that in week 3. It's been so apparent that this guy, his main priority is collecting a paycheck over playing football. And it sucks because we brought him in here to be the edge rusher opposite Danielle Hunter. He had big shoes to fill after Za'Darius left, and he just dropped the ball. And that's what's so upsetting is he never had a desire to play, even with incentives, like financial incentives that encouraged him to play these games. He didn't care enough to go out into the field, and I just think it's disrespectful to the fan base.
I think the obvious answer, if you had a poll out among Vikings fans here, would be Lewis Cine, just because I think he played a little bit against the Packers in the garbage time at the end, the bad kind of garbage time. But I have personally assigned like a next year cutoff, like to see if he makes the team and B, if he plays, because I'm trying to, I guess, give him the benefit of the doubt. The dude's legs snapped and they already have like 4 good safeties. So, maybe they won't use him until he's absolutely needed when Harrison Smith retires, for example, or something like that. So Cine, I think, would be the fan base's answer, and fair, very fair. I would say Alexander Madison, for me, is the biggest disappointment. He hasn't scored a touchdown, and all offseason I heard from the Vikings coaching staff that their emphasis was going to be to run the ball and have balanced play calling. And then, in fact, it got worse this year. And I don't singularly blame Madison, but the visions of him being some semblance of an RB1 to me were a huge disappointment. And then when you saw the other guys come in, like Akers or Chandler, like they looked a little bit better and fast. And so I sincerely hope that the Vikings will explore one of the top 3 running backs in this draft, because that man can probably be drafted in round 2 or 3, which I think is reasonable. Dakota, who is yours?
On the Lewis C note, did you know that we could have drafted Kyle Hamilton?
No, I've never heard that.
No idea.
Oh, I know, crazy, right? I'm sorry, I had to. Okay, mine's kind of coming out of left field, and I hope this is a safe space to say it. For me, it's a Caleb Evans. I'm sorry, it is. On paper, he looks decent. But just for me, it's overall the fact that we were hyped up about him. We were told that he's going to be the cornerback. He's going to be awesome. But then you actually watch him, and there have been multiple times throughout the season I'm like, does he know how to tackle? Does he know how to do what his job is? And then he goes on Twitter and he talks a big game. He's like, nobody knows me except me, or like the haters fuel me and stuff like that. And then he goes as far as to actually even get benched by Brian Flores for some of his gameplay inability, I should say. And yeah, like 3 forced fumbles, awesome. An interception, great. But at the end of the day, you're not just there to make the big plays. You are there to stop the offense from making big plays. And there have been multiple occasions where he hasn't been able to do that. So for me, when he is explosive, great. But there is not enough of him just simply doing his job for me to sit here and be like, oh yeah, I'm happy that he's on my team. I think he's the biggest disappointment. And it's purely simply because to me, he was overhyped and the advertisement was not worth the product that we actually got out of him.
In the last, 3 games, pretty much since the 4th quarter of the Bengals game, the Vikings defense has been thoroughly exposed, and all of a sudden cornerbacks are an issue again. And for the love of God, if I have to go into another offseason talking about which Vikings cornerback are they going to get, it's just same thing every year. And I was really excited about a month ago when it felt like, all right, all these guys are projecting in the right direction. We shall see. The final thing we're going to talk about is the foremost offseason priority. And I'm operating under the pretense that re-signing Justin Jefferson is a no-brainer. Like, that's going to happen. So I'm not even going to mention that. Otherwise, if it was up in the air, like he didn't want to be back or the Vikings didn't want to invest the money, we would, I think, universally say that. Mine is drafting a quarterback in the here and now. And I don't care if Cousins comes back or not. If they want to bring him back for a year or two, you should still draft Jaden Daniels or Michael Penix, whichever guy they end up loving. Draft that guy now, because if you're going to go into year 3 of a new regime and they just keep saying, well, no, Kirk's the guy, we don't even need a young quarterback, I don't think that that's smart for their job security. Nor, I mean, the Vikings, I said this last offseason, have the golden opportunity to do both. You have a top 12, depending on people's perception, quarterback in Cousins. Well, you can let the next guy marinate for a year like the Packers do every time, or the Chiefs did in 2017. So mine, after signing Jefferson, and I know there are other needs like you guys are about to talk to, but it's identifying and finally drafting the quarterback who will take over from Cousins. Tyler, what is your top foremost offseason priority for these Vikings?
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario where the Vikings don't draft a quarterback in the first round.
Fair.
But I think our biggest need is defensive line, whether that be an edge rusher who can complement Danielle Hunter or a pass rushing interior defensive lineman who can generate pressure from the interior. I mean, we have the lowest interior defensive line pass rush win rate or something along those lines in the NFL. Like Brett Coleman had a tweet about that, where it's like the Jerzon Newton index. And for those who aren't aware of who that is, Jerzon Newton is the top interior defensive lineman in this year's draft class. So, I'd love for the Vikings to either draft Newton or one of the top edge rushers in this year's draft and really build that, that front four. Because I think a lot of our cornerback struggles were due to the fact that we couldn't get pressure at all. It didn't matter if we blitzed or if we didn't blitz. We just did not have the talent to generate consistent pressure. And when you look at Brian Flores' defense as of late, and fans are saying, well, how come it fell off? Oh, did they solve his defense? Are we screwed? Is it just Donatel all over again? No. He just does not have the talent on the defensive line to do much of anything besides play zone. Because whenever he brings pressure, it backfires on us. There's a 50-yard bomb to someone. So he's trying to protect his corners. He's trying to hope that a quarterback makes a mistake and we get a turnover that way in coverage. But next season, we need a more consistent way of generating pressure. And to do that, we need to build up the defensive line.
I agree that finding a starting edge rusher that, whether it's a free agent or the draft, and then hopefully finally upgrading on, they never, ever invest in a defensive tackle that's, better than Jonathan Bullard or Shamar Stephen. And I've been asking for that for 5 years. I agree. But the only thing that I struggle to understand is now that the Vikings have lost 3 in a row, from people that I trust in the Vikings community, all of a sudden the defense needs a cornerback, it needs an inside linebacker, it needs all this stuff. And between weeks 4 and 14 per EPA per play, it was the best defense in football. So I think there's something to be said that if Brian Flores is back in a second year and then the young players are going to mature, I think we're hitting the panic button a little much on, this defense needs all these things, because if it's an inside linebacker need, that's as easy as re-signing Hicks or promoting Asamoah. I don't know why that is this ginormous need by the masses. Cornerback, I'm still convinced is young and will get better, but I certainly agree with you on the defensive tackle spots. I just don't understand why we're back to square one thinking the defense is horrendous and it needs a complete facelift this offseason. Of course, some improvements will be great, but let's see. So we are on foremost offseason need. Tyler and I have identified ours. Take us out, Dakota, off the show with yours.
I mean, obviously, first and foremost, like you said, JJ, no brainer. For me, Kirk Cousins, and I know a lot of people have been really mixed about this in general, which I find to be really interesting. May I remind people that at last year's offseason, he was even okay with taking a pay cut to stay with the Vikings. So I don't know who needs to remember that. I don't know who needs to hear that, but I feel like it needs to be said again. Obviously, sign the guys that we need to re-sign, Daniil, etc. I also agree. We definitely need more help on the defensive line. Get an edge rusher to help out Ivan Pace and Daniil. I also, to your point that you mentioned earlier, I would like another running back. Like you said, second, third round, there are some pretty decent guys in this draft. And yeah, we've got Ty Chandler. Yes, we've got Cam Akers, Madison, if you decide to keep him. But I feel like when Cam Akers went down and Madison also had a couple of injuries, we were scrambling. And I don't want to do that again. I would very much like to have a consistent offense that is able to do both and is able to take some pressure off of Kirk Cousins or whoever we have back there. And on that note, I would also like some help on the offensive line a little bit. We were doing great for a while there, and then it started to get down back into the region
that pretty much means a better center, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's just maybe we shouldn't have traded Ezra Cleveland for a 6th, even though he was in a contract year, as much as I love Risner.
I mean, I wasn't going to say it, but I'm glad you said it. For me too, honestly, and this isn't like on the players side of things, for me as somebody who creates social media content, I would also really like to see the Vikings step it up a bit. I would like them to take a look at what some of the other teams like the Detroit Lions, the Bills, the Chargers are doing with their social media and figure out a way to start doing that with ours. They already have a big social media presence, but in my opinion, when I think Minnesota Vikings social media, I actually think Victor the Viking. I don't think our actual team. I think of the skull line. So for me, and I know a lot of people are going to be really confused as to why I bring that up, but I think that social media in this day and age is also a must-need look at during the offseason.
Excellent. The thing that trips me up a little bit on, so in the draft, because we kind of commonly agreed that they can get a good starting running back in round 2 or 3, that leads me to believe that the first picks in the draft for the Vikings will be a quarterback and then a running back. And that means the defensive holes, outside linebacker, inside linebacker, defensive tackle, and cornerback are going to have to be solved in free agency. And where I haven't reconciled things is right now they have about $37 million in cap space. If you turn around and give Kirk $35 million, then you're like, all right, we got 2 million before we start backloading people's contracts to sign free agents. So that's where I want to believe that Cousins will be back because they keep saying how much they love them. But if you're going to repair this defense with all these new players that people claim that they need, I don't know how you do that while paying Kirk. That's what I want folks to think about. I'm sure it's like the cap is a myth, folks. They'll find a way to do it. But that will involve like restructuring Brian O'Neill's deal, restructuring pretty much everybody's if they want to have a bonanza of defensive signings. All right, Tyler, where do you write? Where can we find you?
I write at Daily Norseman, and y'all can find me at Tyler Ireland MIN.
I read your Daily Norseman article about your Packers experience because I wanted to see if you were just heartbroken, but you had a real positive spin on that. So I invite people to check that out. Even though it was a awful outcome, you made the best of it with your dad and brother.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I wish I could have caught you at the game. I was looking behind me throughout the whole
really?
time.
Yeah,
Like, where's
I
Dustin?
looked at the back of your head for 3 hours.
I couldn't spot you in the crowd, and I was trying to hit you up, and he's like, "Oh, he's probably not checking his phone right now."
Yeah,
so.
we became totally dejected, and I just kept my damn phone in my pocket, trying to figure out when would be a good time to convince people to leave. When I knew in reality that nobody really would want to until it was over. Same thing happened with the Colts, and thankfully we didn't. All right, Dakota, where do we find you?
So I can be found on most social media like Instagram and TikTok at Western Dakota, and on Twitter I can be found at Kirk's Minivan, which I think will be my name on Twitter for the rest of my life.
Yeah, even
funniest at.
Yeah, even when he's like 55 and just a faint man, he's like the Tommy Kramer at the time. Yeah,
yeah, he'll still be on a poster right next to my pillow.
Yep, and just keep that up for your background indefinitely. All right,
exactly.
We'll be back next Friday, probably in full off-season mode, building on this conversation. And if the 14 parlay happens, we'll be talking about Vikings at Cowboys, which feels really weird right now to even think about. All right, guys, we'll talk to you in 1 week.
Bye. Thank you.
Later, Tyler.